Pp2 students, welcome back. Let's continue our online sessions. Last time we have stopped at page 56. We have finished chapter 1. Today we move to page 57 together, that questions based on chapter 1. Let's try to solve these questions together. Here at the page, we start with exercise 1, match the words and the definitions. I have 7 words here and I have 7 definitions. I need to match them. Number 1, advert, already matched with D. 2, assistant. 3, copy. 4, encyclopedia. 5, laborer. 6, pay. 7, surprise. On the right hand, I have the choices A till G. I have A, someone who works hard outside, for example, building a road or a house. B, a book with information about many different subjects. C, the money that you receive for doing a job. G, information in a newspaper or magazine that's selling something. E, the feeling that you have when something unusual happens. F, someone who helps someone else do their job. G, to make something that looks like something else. So here number 1 with D. Number 2, assistant, is I match it with F. So the assistant is someone who helps someone else do their job. Then number 3, copy, I match it with G. That's correct. To make something that looks like something else. Then for encyclopedia, I match it with B. A book with information about many different subjects. Then 5, laborer, I match it with A, someone who works hard outside, like building a road or a house. Then pay, I match it with C, the money that you receive for doing a job. And the last one, surprise, must be with E, the feeling that you have when something unusual happens. Let's move to the next exercise together. Exercise 2. Here, exercise 2, complete the sentences with the correct names. I have Dr. Watson, Mr. Ross, Mrs. Spaulding, and Mr. Wilson. Number 1 is already solved. Dr. Watson is a friend of Sherlock Holmes. 2, has a small shop in London. Who has a small shop in London? Of course, he is Mr. Spaulding. Okay, then number 3, is the manager of the Red-Headed League. Yes, he is Mr. Ross. And 4, of course, works for Mr. Wilson is Mr. Spaulding. Mr. Spaulding. Then let's move to the next question together. Question number 3. Put the following events in the correct order. Let's rearrange these sentences according to the story. What happened first? What happened first? A, Mr. Spaulding and Mr. Wilson went to the Red-Headed League. B, Mr. Wilson agreed to start work the following day. C, Mr. Spaulding pushed past the men waiting outside the office. D, Mr. Spaulding showed Mr. Wilson an advert for a job with the Red-Headed League. E, Mr. Ross told Mr. Wilson that he could have the job if he started the following day. So what happened first is D. Yes, that's what happened first. Mr. Spaulding showed Mr. Wilson an advert for a job with the Red-Headed League. Then number 2, A. Mr. Spaulding and Mr. Wilson went to the Red-Headed League. Then number 3, I match it with C. Mr. Spaulding pushed past the men waiting outside the office. Then number 4, E. Mr. Ross told Mr. Wilson that he could have the job if he started the following day. So the last one must be B. Mr. Wilson agreed to start work the following day. Let's move to the next question. Next exercise, exercise 4. Answer the following questions. Question number 1 in exercise 4. What was Mr. Holmes clever at? Sherlock Holmes. He was clever at what? He was clever at solving crimes. He was clever at solving crimes. Question 2. Why was Mr. Wilson surprised when he was listening to Mr. Holmes? If you remember, Mr. Wilson was surprised because everything Sherlock Holmes said about him was true. So he was surprised because everything Sherlock Holmes said about him was true. Then question number 3 in exercise 4. What is unusual about the Red-Headed League? That they only employ men with red hair. The work was unusual, of course. So, let's move to the next question. Question 4. Why did Mr. Wilson accept the job? He accepted the job because the money could really help his shop. It was a good offer, of course. Question number 5. Find an example in the story that shows us that Sherlock Holmes is a good detective. Sherlock Holmes looked carefully at Mr. Wilson and worked out that Mr. Wilson used to be a laborer, that he had visited China in the past, and that he did a lot of writing. I will say it one more time. Question 5, the answer of question 5. Sherlock Holmes looked carefully at Mr. Wilson and worked out that Mr. Wilson used to be a laborer, that he had visited China in the past, and that he did a lot of writing. Then the critical thinking questions. The 3 questions are left for the students their opinions. Any logical answer is correct. Any logical answer is correct. Let's move to the next chapter quickly. Let's move to page 58, chapter 2. As we see here in the book at page 58, the Red-Headed League, chapter 2, let's read together to complete our story. Here on the left hand, the next day, Mr. Wilson bought a pen, some ink, and some paper and went to the Red-Headed League. He thought about the job. Could it be real? It seemed foolish to copy an encyclopedia. But to his surprise, when he arrived at the office, Mr. Ross was waiting for him. So Mr. Wilson sat at the table and started work. He copied information from the encyclopedia into a book until 2 o'clock. Then he went home. Mr. Wilson went to the office every day. At the end of the week, he received his pay, his salary of 4 English pounds. The work was easy and he was very content. Was very happy. This continued for 8 weeks, like 2 months. One day he went to the office, but it was locked. There was a letter on the door that said the Red-Headed League has closed. Mr. Wilson didn't know what to do. He asked the landlord, like the owner, why the office was closed, but the landlord said that he didn't know. He said that he didn't know Mr. Ross or the Red-Headed League. It was a mystery and Mr. Wilson wanted Sherlock Holmes to solve it. Let's go to the right hand here. Holmes asked Mr. Wilson some questions about his assistant, Mr. Spaulding. After Mr. Wilson left, Holmes asked Dr. Watson to go to a violin concert with him that evening. On the way, they could go past Mr. Wilson's shop. When they arrived, Holmes walked up to the shop and hit the ground with his walking stick 3 or 4 times. Dr. Watson thought this was very unusual. Then Holmes knocked on the shop door. A young man answered and Holmes asked him how to get to the concert. Did you knock on the door so that you could see the young man who works for Mr. Wilson? Asked Dr. Watson. No, I didn't want to see the man. I wanted to see the knees of his trousers, replied Holmes. Dr. Watson thought that was very unusual answer. He didn't understand, but Holmes didn't explain. He was looking carefully at the different houses and shops behind Mr. Wilson's shop. There was a newspaper shop, a bank, and a restaurant. Then it was time to go to that concert, so the two men left. Let's move to the next page, page 59 together. I have here the first exercise, match the words and the definitions. I have number 1, advert, number 2, I have number 1, concert, number 2, advert, it was in the last lesson, in the last chapter, but this here number 1, I have number 1 here, concert, number 2, content, number 3, foolish, number 4, hit, number 5, landlord, number 6, look, number 7, nook, number 8, walking stick. On the right hand, I have the definitions. A, to make a sound when you bring your hands onto something hard. B, to close the door or window so that people can't open it. C, a man who has a house or office where people live or work. D, to bring your hand or an object into something quickly and hard, like tennis racket on a ball. E, happy, if something people use to help them walk. G, not a good idea. H, when people play music, sing, etc. So number 1 is already matched with H. Concert is when people play music or sing. Then number 2, content, we said it means happy. I match it with E. Foolish, I match it with yes. G, not a good idea. Then number 4, hit, I match it with D, to bring your hand or an object into something quickly and hard, like a tennis racket on a ball, like when we hit the ball, the tennis ball with the racket. Then I have landlord, number 5, I match it with C, a man who has a house or office where people live or work. Then I have here number 6, look, I match it with yes, with B, to close the door or window so that people can't open it. Then I have number 7, knock, I match it with A, that's correct, to make a sound when you bring your hand into something. Then the last one, walking stick, it must be with F, something people use to help them walk. I will give you the chance to solve the next question till the end of the page. Then we discuss the answers together at the next session or the next lecture. I have finished my session today. I wish you the best of luck. Goodbye and take care.